all of us to talk about what are the key trends that you see that are driving the evolution of fintechs and the payments today. Annie, let's start with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheetal. Thank you, NPCI. When we as TerraPay started in 2015, we looked at what are we going to do, and the era for fintechs, when they speak about hyper growth, that was all we spoke about in 2015. And as we have moved to an era where we have constraints on capital and all that put together, the focus which is coming back is on profitability and a focus on what I would call it as regulatory and compliance. And I think that is a trend which we see at a global scale. To go deeper into this, I see, and I think we have got a fantastic panel here in terms of what we see in Africa, what we see in Asia, and in Europe. And two prominent positions which come in. One, what we call it as real-time payments. That is a focus globally, be it in Singapore, be it in Brazil, be it in Europe. RTP networks are coming into the fray, and how cross-border money movement is being enabled by these real-time payment solutions. So that's one. And the second one is how emerging payments, and I think Candy will speak a lot about that in terms of how wallets, how they are becoming a prominent payment instrument apart from bank accounts and cards. So I think I see those, and when we say at TerraPay, we see is those two trends coming to the forefront as we go in the next few years forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Christophe, you would like to add to that?
Yes, if we talk about fintech and more precisely regarding paytech, because Lyra is a paytech which is operating over the world, I would say that the main evolution for paytech, but also for fintech, is real time. Now all the transactions are going towards real time. A good example is with UPI, which is real time, which is doing more than 14 billion of transactions each month on real time. And last year it was 46% of the overall transaction in the world. And in Europe also we are going towards real time with some more difficulties, because I think our UX is not as good as UPI with PSD2 and PSD3. And this is also the case in many countries. In paytech, one of the main evolution is it's turning from card to QR code and towards mobile. You don't need anymore, I would say, a physical card to pay. You need more a mobile to be able to pay. And this is completely changing the habits of payments, and this is quite important. You have new factor form like QR code or whatever, but I think the biggest evolution is mobile smartphone, when you can identify yourself. So regarding security, this is quite important. And he was talking about also profitability, because I think the bubble for fintech is over. So I'm sorry for all the fintechs who might be there. It will be more and more difficult to get millions or billions. So now there are new hypes like AI or like decarbonization or so on. At Vivatech, I was very surprised. Last year there were nearly no more fintech. Everybody was talking about decarbonization and about AI. I don't know what will be the next hype. We were in a hype, but we are not anymore a hype. fintech, but this is good. In Lyra, we have been always taken the choice. We are a self-funded company, and we have been able to develop with any funds. And I think this is our company can last for a very long time. For example, in India, we are there for 17 years. And I think this is thanks to the strong relation we have with banks in India, with NPCI, that we have been able to launch this project to enable UPI in Europe. I will talk later about it. I think I talked a lot.
Yes, would love to hear a little bit more on that, on your thoughts on AI as well as your UPI launch too, Christophe. But would love to hear a little bit more from you, Candy. What do you think about the evolving trends, and especially, I would say, how do you see it in the landscape of changing, how it is affecting the traditional banking? How would you talk about that?
Right. I think when it comes to fintechs, the boom of fintechs was always to serve in segments where traditional financial institutions were not placing themselves. And I think a big opportunity for fintechs was primarily the financial inclusion drive that policymakers were also doing. And you'll find that where you have thriving fintechs, it's usually where financial inclusion is very low. In Namibia, for instance, your financial inclusion was very high. A large part of the community has access to formal financial services. So it's very much a bank-driven ecosystem. But we've really seen more and more fintechs coming in. And previously, fintechs were serving banking institutions in the background. So there was a lot of fintechs dealing in the space of payments facilitation, payments aggregation, your debit order collections as an example. But I think as we've seen in other countries, what we're seeing is fintechs are becoming more and more consumer-centric and coming to the fore. To provide, let's say, your value-added services, they want to play within the mobile money space, as an example. And I think the way fintechs have changed the landscape of payments, they've done that in a very, very big way. So traditionally with banks and financial institutions, they served customers, but customers needed to come to them. So with what I think fintechs have done is given the gaps in the market that banks might have not been serving through traditional products and services, they digitize their products in order to reach the customer. So there was a lot of let us go to the customer instead, especially through the mobile device. And we saw what happened with M-Pesa and the reach that they were able to have. So through digitization, you're coming closer to the customers. The other thing that led then to your decentralization as well. Because usually with traditional services, you have a very specific place where you can go and get served or get financial products. But with the fintechs, you see a proliferation of financial services digitally, so it completely decentralized the access to which people had. Digitization, decentralization, and I think that also further led to the democratization of financial services. So people that weren't necessarily previously able to get loans or credit, fintechs are less risk averse, so they're able to take that risk. And they can provide services where people were previously excluded. So people have more access to different types of services. They have more access to different types of players. So that's huge when it comes to consumer empowerment. I think the other thing that democratization does is, when you open up a bank account, there are certain regulatory requirements you have to meet, especially from a KYC perspective. With more and more stores of value, like wallets that came in, they didn't have as many stringent requirements. So previously excluded people were able to be excluded just because they have a cell phone, as an example. So a large driver, I think, of the fintech revolution was the mobile device. You have a lot more people that have mobile devices than those that have bank accounts. And I think on the tail of that, banks also started coming to the fore because, you're disrupted. So I think that's what we've been able to see. And of course, competition went up. Consumer experience went up. Even regulators were disrupted. So I think fintechs have pretty much touched on everyone. Regulators started coming up with your RegTechs, they came up with your open banking regulations like PSD2. Even governments found a lot of value in your fintech type payments, especially with their e-government initiatives like social grant payments and so forth. So I think there isn't an area, I think, in the financial space that fintechs have not disrupted. And I think to us as traditional service providers, I always say that when it comes to disruption, long before disruption becomes a threat, it's first and foremost an opportunity. So I think there's a lot of room for strategic collaboration and partnerships, and just to see how both fintechs and traditional banks can coexist.
Yeah, you've touched upon quite a few of the things which I will summarize, but would love to hear a bit from you, Jeremy, before I do that.
Okay, you guys just sort of give a very short contribution to this topic. I would say conversion. You see the trend and where I think fintech, where we see fintech and banking, is conversion. And that may or may not be a good thing. So if you look back in terms of how fintech happened, technology, there's a lot of evolution on mobile, we get all of that. But essentially, it was a change in regulatory mindset, especially after 2008. Financial services were not deemed, or financial service providers were not deemed to have provided sufficient financial inclusion services, or at least things were deemed quite inefficient. And that was a very prevailing thought about a decade ago. So there was a whole boom on fintech. Fintech didn't boom because of technology. Yeah? It boomed because regulators decided we need to do something different. And that has started. And of course, with technologies and new players lowering the bar for entry, so everything we see where we take more risks or less regulated entities are allowed to do certain things, that has gone through the whole cycle. So in a way, I say it's gotten boring. Yeah? So when it's gotten boring, there's a convergence. So in markets that we see that they feel that financial services are well provided, then there's a convergence. Regulations are tightening up. They're going to make sure that fintechs are going to gravitate and be more regulated like banks. In markets where there's still that little bit to go, then we see not that divergence, not convergence yet, but in a sense there's still more leeway for innovation, for different kinds of maybe light touch regulation for things to evolve a little bit. But the longer trend would be it will all converge. It depends on different regulatory standpoint, depending on how regulations are done in the country. Some countries, while not very financially inclusive, it's a feature, not a bug. So in that sense, how things will evolve, we will see from different regulatory markets itself, but it's starting to converge. I think that's the biggest thing that we sense. Regulations are getting a bit tighter because people feel that we've gone enough, or at least taking a breather and then they'll go forward again. Yes.
I completely agree that somewhere they will converge. We do see some bit of it happening in India as well. And while no fintech panel can be complete unless we touch upon the compliance actually and regulatory world, especially if all of us are coming from the cross-border space. But before we go there, we did talk about profitability, we did talk about mobiles moving, a little bit about real-time payments. This is what I do see, that's something, a technological trend. In fact, we did talk a little bit on AI as well. So how do you see these technologies, underlying technologies changing the way we transact today? Not just domestic markets, but also cross-border, because though we had a panel on cross-border, but I believe the real-time payment issue or requirement is more in the cross-border space, whether P2P or B2B, both. Would love to hear your thoughts on it, Annie, because you are in 32 countries today. And so how are you solving this problem from technology side?
Thank you. So, when we started TerraPay, we looked at 3 pillars. We looked at real-time payments, we looked at liquidity and money movement as another pillar. And the third one was, we came from the telecom background. So for us, it was when you take your mobile phone and go to another country, you receive an SMS. You don't worry about, how and where somebody is able to send you to, because the SMS just reaches. And that's what we call as interoperability. So if you put these 3 pillars together, is what we speak about the challenges and the opportunity around financial inclusion, around cross-border money movement. I think Candy, kind of briefly spoke about how, for example, you have today cards which are very interoperable. You have a card from one bank, you can use it in any country in the world. But what you'll be fascinating to see is by 2028, there will be more mobile wallets in this world than bank accounts. These mobile wallets, for example, how do they interop when people move from one country to another? It should move exactly like a mobile phone. And I think that pretty much sums up technology piece of in terms of how we are able to collaborate and work with various financial institutions globally. And I think Jeremy spoke about, we were talking on the side about how, we don't have to do everything on our own, but if we can work with collaborative partners who understand regulations, local regulations really well, and it could be a bank, it could be a fintech, it could be anyone, but who understand that position really well, money movement becomes very, very easy. So it can, from the outside, look cross-border, 200 countries, very, very difficult. Collaboration comes on the forefront of that. And once you build an cohesive technology which allows APIs and everything to move through, it becomes much easier. But I do want to emphasize on one point, which is interoperability will be the game changer. Today, you can't accept, for example, cards at a terminal which doesn't accept cards. Why not? You should be able to do that. I think that's where probably the new wave for technology is going to come in, where mobile wallets from Africa come in to Singapore and should be able to use their Kenyan shillings wallet and Singapore dollars. It's coming in. That's where I think fintechs will bring in that edge of innovation, what Jeremy was talking about, people like us who will bring in the regulatory side of the story as well, because eventually you need to move money in the most appropriate way. That's where the regulatory and the compliance positions will come into play. So to me, it's always a position about, when we speak about fintechs, is how fast you can collaborate defines the success of a project.
I do see that coming from Jeremy, the way they have moved across countries over partnerships itself. Jeremy, would you like to talk a little bit about it?
Yes, actually, just to further emphasize what you just said, there will be what we would call interlocking platforms. So we don't have the luxury of time. I can imagine how the financial systems that we are familiar today evolved and took over many, many years. Yeah, from 1945, and let's not go there. This is the old traditional way. And what happened in the last 10 years is there's a lot of explosion of domestic real-time payments. There's a lot of explosion in terms of domestic clearing and regional clearing systems. But they can't interoperate. And the problem is a lot of them have their own rules. And that was, I think, the problem of probably a few years ago. But increasingly, I think that's starting to happen. People are trying to figure out the best model to work with one another. I think just to do a shout out, about 2 months ago, I think the BIS guys did a wonderful job in Brussels when they announced Project Nexus, which is connecting national networks. But that's where the national switches get involved. But there's a lot of work involved in terms of association, even for mobile operators in Europe, and getting to put a framework where things can interoperate. So in that sense, that cross-border bit is no more the sole domain of the large national clearinghouses. Everybody's figuring out a way to connect faster and better. And in a way, that's as intended, because else things will take too long. We work in financial services for a very long time, and we know it takes a long time. So that burst of innovation that has happened due to some deregulation and introducing fintech into the space, a bit of randomness and a bit of recklessness has drawn fruit. There will be interlocking networks together, because there are hundreds of countries, and each country may have more than one network. There's no one size fit all anymore. And I think for a sense of fit And for resilience, that's also good because there's no single point of failure when you have multiple networks connecting to one another. Much more so in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be a plus. So that's where we see cross-border payments evolving. There's a sensitive topic which probably we would cover in terms of regulations. So in that sense, well, yes, the technology now can connect. The standards can be established, but I think compliance, harmonization, rule standardizations, and all the various what we call OPREGs, which is a horrible word for interoperability, which is operating regulations, will start to be standardized. And I think, we're probably half a decade away from having more fixed frameworks and probably a decade away from true interoperability across the world. Yeah.
Christophe, would you like to talk about some case study around this, that the new technology has come up? And I saw that you recently launched UPI as well in France. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. Our job in Lyra is to offer to all the customer seamless payment experience. So that means when we are operating in India, we are offering the payment method which are available in India, like UPI, RuPay, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and so on. And when we are operating in Europe, this is the same. But people now are more and more traveling, and our role is to offer the customers to pay with their payment method. So for example, when India are coming in France, they shall be able to pay with their payment method, which is UPI. It's more simple for them. They are accustomed about it. They know that there is a security in it if they are using a card that they are not using it, so they won't feel okay. And furthermore, the big thing with when they are paying with UPI in France, that they are seeing exactly the amount of rupee, okay, they are going to pay because the change is already done, and so they know that, for example, if they are purchasing a ticket of Eiffel Tower, they're gonna pay 2,000 rupees, for example. Of course, it will be 22 euros, but they know that it will be 2,000 euro. But to bring UPI, for example, in France, as we have done, it's not a seamless experience for a PayTech. Because as you know, UPI is based on QR code. In India, most of the people are using static QR code. That means that it is a buyer which is entering the amount. But in France and in Europe, this is not possible because it's always a cash register which is entering the amount. So we had to implement a dynamic QR code, okay? But after you have to display the dynamic QR code. So with the Eiffel Tower, and thanks Patrick, the general manager of Eiffel Tower, to be there, to be in GFF. So you have the most iconic monument person, which is there, and who has implemented UPI on Eiffel Tower. So now you can purchase ticket of Eiffel Tower with UPI. So what we have faced with Eiffel Tower, we were the first to implement dynamic QR code for an e-commerce website in Europe. So some change has been requested, but we have done it. So we have launched Eiffel Tower in February with UPI, and we have many purchases now from Indians on the Eiffel Tower. And more recently, we have launched Galeries Lafayette, which is also the most iconic department store in France. And thanks to Mr. Emmont to be there with representing Galeries Lafayette. And we have to face a challenge because Galeries Lafayette was yet accepting QR code from WeChat Pay and Alipay, but the way of functioning was different because with Alipay and WeChat, you read the cash person, the cash register person is reading the QR code. But with UPI, it is the contrary. You display the QR code. So we had to manage to display the QR code on the cash register of Galeries Lafayette. And also, so it's a big change. And in one day, we have been able, thanks to Galeries Lafayette and to Lundi Matin, to be able to display at Galeries Lafayette Haussmann, to display the dynamic QR code on the cash register. So now we have some work to do because it's a new payment method. So we have to train the people at Galeries Lafayette to accept UPI. But please, if you come in France, go in the most iconic department store and do some purchase with UPI in Galeries Lafayette to experience your payment way in UPI. And of course, we are going to open many other stores, many other websites. But it's a huge challenge to be able to do that seamlessly. And this is what we have done with Lyra, to offer the same experience of payment to Indians when they are traveling in Europe.
So fantastic. Yeah, this is like, UPI, dynamic QR codes, the technology is being used, got created somewhere else, and it is getting now rolled out in different countries and making the customer experience extremely, extremely seamless and phenomenal. Now, of course, whether you are in France, and I'm sure whenever you take your Schengen visa, you would love to visit the store and try this out. How we can make our payments using UPI itself. But Candy, yes, we all, this now I would like to touch a little bit about, we all talk about fintechs, we come from fintechs, we want to talk about, make the technology changes all across. And we just think technology, how can I make the customer experience much more seamless, and as to your topic, how do I do the financial inclusion? How do I reach to the unbanked? What is the fastest way? What is the easiest way, etc., to reach there? But when it comes to the banks, right, you represent a bank. So how do you see these technologies when they come to you that, okay, we can change the world using our minds, right? Okay, this is the way we want to work on. But when it comes to the regulatory world, when you are in a bank, so how do you see this technology? And I would love to pass this question across that when we are building technology, how do we keep regulatory and the regulation and compliance is not even static, right? It's very fluid. It's kind of, so how do you make sure that you are innovating, keeping the compliance in mind, and from your angle, how do you see it when the technology comes to you? So how do you evaluate that, and how do you grow along that?
I think I do agree with Jeremy's point. It emphasized on how regulators have become a bit more contemporary over the years. And I think our regulator has been doing that over the past few years, where there's a shift towards enabling regulation. And I think traditionally you had banks that would play within the financial services, and the rules were very geared towards banks. But what's also helping us as traditional institutions is the change in regulations that Jeremy mentioned. So especially in my area with your mobile money, your wallets, you see that regulation is opening up to allow more and more fintechs to come in. And the way we see our regulator and the enabling regulation is to, for instance, regulators tend to, let's say, have your sandboxes. And I think that helps not just fintechs, but even us as traditional institutions to enter sandbox areas to test our products. So that's an area I think that enables unknown products or services that are very unique to the market, where we can allow for a sandbox experience and do the testing perhaps with regulations, with the regulator as well as the fintechs as an example. The other thing is when it comes to fintechs, the traditional institutions tend to have legacy systems and legacy processes. and there's quite a lot of bureaucracy. So we, in our area as an example, one of the things we are looking more and more to is strategic partnerships. When we can do certain things in-house, and there are pros and cons to that, but where we see that perhaps developments might take a while, or where a partner or fintech is able to do something much faster, much better than us, that's usually where the value comes in. For us as Bank Windhoek, we have a lot of our in-house developments. Our products are there, our wallets are already established. For instance, they sit in our core banking system, but the space is becoming more and more competitive. You want to get to market much quicker. So strategically, you're also considering to say, do you outsource your wallet? Do you partner with a fintech and have a mobile money platform? Do you keep it in-house, but perhaps partner with fintechs through your microservices and your APIs, as an example? But those are some of the strategic considerations we have to ultimately make sure that we remain competitive and we are able to get to market much, much faster. But I do like what I'm seeing from a regulatory perspective, where there's a lot of enabling efforts by the regulator to bring fintechs in. It does put pressure on us because from competition also increases. But as I mentioned earlier, you should, if you can navigate smartly, if you can spot fintechs that can add value to your business model or strategy, that's a win. And I think the last thing that I'd just like to add again is in Namibia, we're also adopting the UPI. So that was announced earlier in the year, but it's regulatory driven. So the central bank has taken a very similar route to India, where the regulator is driving that project. It has been kicked off, so it's very good to see all industry players coming together. And it's not just the banks, but it's also the fintechs, it's the third-party service providers that are coming in. And I think the UPI will create a very a pivotal shift in the types of collaborations we're going to see between traditional institutions and fintechs. Yeah.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much. I would love to hear your thoughts on it, Jeremy, a little bit. How do you innovate keeping that in? While you've been talking about regulation and compliance, do you in fact think about regulation first and then start to innovate, or is it the other way around?
I can't resist jumping in what Christophe has just said. He made a plug to Gary's Lafayette and the Eiffel Tower. I'd just like to say that the UPI has also expanded to Singapore. So if you land in Singapore Changi Airport, most, if not all merchants soon will accept UPI. So there's a roadmap, that's why we're all here. And the expansion of interoperability is starting to happen. And its expansion has reached Singapore as well. So I have to jump in on that one. If I could add a little bit on the technology itself, and I think you mentioned QR. It may not be totally relevant for the conversation, but this is one point on technology that I would like to mention. QR, the technology in QR isn't in that little image, that 4 little boxes, and we've seen it, right? I mean, it's the QR. The technology is in the camera. And that's the thing that we think is the most misunderstood part of QR payments. It's deemed as, QR is a very old technology. It's like 10, 15 years ago when people used to have it in newspapers and you scan it and then it leads to a URL. That's what it does, right? And for some reason, our mentality of what QR is supposed to do froze from there. So when QR payments started evolving around Asia, or at least in this part of the world, the first assumption was it evolved because it's cheap. Because chip cards were expensive, it's secure, yeah? And we went to contactless cards, which is equally onorously expensive. It's not that bad in certain developed markets, but in developing world, it's onerous. You can't put 1 million readers out there on a reasonable cost. So the first basic assumption was QR was the framework, the technology was because it's cheap. But that's not why it's so successful. Yes, cheap helps, right? It could proliferate. You could print 1 million QRs and it's not going to cost like 1 million readers. It's actually the camera. So we went from feature phones and the way we're hampered a lot today is when, it depends on how many old phones we have or smartphones we have. The 2 megapixels, the 4 megapixels, 8, 16, 32, 64. You see where I'm going on this one? The denser you can pack your QR and the more advanced the cameras become, there will be increasingly amounts of data that can be exchanged at point of sale. Let me just put this there. Today, we was on the card world, the tap world, the swipe world, and we completely embraced that. I come from Singapore. We were fully card out before the first QR ever popped up in Singapore. And the assumption is card's done its job and done, QR will evolve to contactless. Cards, no, it won't. It's going to go the other way around. Because cards built on the old rails, old technology, emphasizing on technology on this bit, whereby if you could remember zip zaps and swipes, and then it went to dips and then taps, right? At the fundamental level, the message they sent is still that 16 digits, the expiry dates, your CVV, a num and some checksums, and maybe 120 bytes. If you dense up your QR today with a 64, 128 megapixel phone, you can send off a megabytes of data. Just think about it that they can do at interaction. So it's not just your payment information, screening information, loyalty information, chargeback, recency tags. A lot of things can be exchanged. Now the bottleneck now is the fundamental financial infrastructure that we all talk about. And this is where I'll do my segue, a long segue, into potential blockchain systems, where at the end of the day, when things are distributed, when whole systems are not constrained by the existing structures that we do have, the front end is ready to send a megabyte or multi-megabytes of data when you pay for something. Now, what you carry on it is where we will probably innovate on, and of course, there'll still be standardization. But let's just say the pipe is open. QRs will not be caught in the constraint of ISO messaging. I thought we still have our ISO 222. We get all that, right? That's for banking. But the actual exchange of information from QR will evolve. And that's why we've taken to not calling it QR payments, we call it optical payments, to get the right framework in terms of where that technology innovation has happened. And if you see that kind of information that can be... Now you can scan a QR and order food. You can book your reservations. That's just scratching the surface. You can do a lot more. And that will drive how our backend evolves, because the guy who wins the front is going to start changing the back. And no backend system today can accommodate maybe blockchain, maybe distributed programming, processing. And that's something that I'm a big advocate of, the optical payments. I don't call it QR payments anymore, but that's always a very underlooked framework in payments. And in the distance, if you can imagine, if you've seen a drone show in some markets, you can scan the drones and it leads to a QR. It looks to a URL. You can never do that on a card. You cannot tap your TV set, but you can put a QR on a TV and you scan it. So there are different innovations that will evolve. And just to say that we have not seen anything yet. In that sense.
Fantastic,
Yeah.
but when you are now moving countries, so how do you navigate the compliance around this, moving money across borders using the using maybe just taps and optical ways of moving money? So how do you think regulation in this?
So if you see, one's the form factor and one's the actual underlining settlement and transfer itself. So the form factor will run ahead as we got that. And even for standardization of reading different QRs of interoperability, built in your smartphone is the ability to translate very quickly. So in that sense, we came up with this concept called QR roaming as well. So it mentions, like, say, if I was in Singapore and I go to Malaysia, for example. I use two references so I don't get the brands wrong. So if we go into Singapore, the largest telco there is probably Maxis. So when we get there, we know we're using Maxis. We're not looking for Singtel, which is Singapore's telco. Same thing will evolve. When we come to India, you're going to look for UPI. When you go to, say, China, you look for WeChat Ali. You come to Singapore, you look for PayNow. You go to different markets, it's called roaming. So your mind will mentally go, and the standards will be established, and interoperability will be worked in, whereby you go into different country, you go roaming payments, right? So that's from the form factor. But underlining everything will be the actual fund movements and settlements. That bit was not going to innovate too much. Everything will still follow what we know as industry practices. Things are getting a little bit blur in QR, especially when digital payments itself. The banking and payment worlds are start to converge, because there are different regulatory frameworks governing consumer-to-merchant retail payments versus bank-to-bank fund transfers and consumer-to-consumer remittance. There'll be different levels of compliance stages needed, but the problem with technology is that they don't care about that, right? Everything is going to be open at one go. So I think where the bottleneck today will be how compliance and compliance regimes and licensing across multiple disparate markets catch up to address this issue. Because if you have a consumer, if you're a merchant, for example, and I'm a consumer, I scan on your QR to pay you, and you being the merchant, that could be a retail payment, just like Visa and Master. If you happen to be a consumer, and I'm as a consumer, and you give me your consumer QR, and I scan it, it's no more a payment, it's a transfer. And different regulations kick in. And conversely, if you're a business, and I'm now trying to pay a business using a corporate card, a corporate account, it's no more a retail payment anymore, it's the B2B transfer. And again, different screening rules kicked in. Technology can support all flows. But how the screening and how the mechanisms we put in place to ensure that we can differentiate, comply to basic regulatory screening, it's going to be very critical. And lying in all that will probably be someone like a TerraPay that will help enable compliance, or not compliance, but at least harmonization of how the data is exchanged. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I did hear quite a few new terms that we have all used today. And I got a message that our time is up. So maybe I would love, Annie, if you can help me wrap up the session. I heard about interoperability. We did talk about real-time payments going ahead. We did talk about dynamic QR codes. This is the way the fintechs will probably evolve and change, not just the domestic, but cross-border payments is where it is headed. But would love to, if you could wrap up the session.
Oh, thank you. And I think just to kind of wrap up, final position on fintechs, and a lot of people speak about cross-border money movement. Cross-border money movement, we have learned, is a business of compliance, period. You speak about to banks, you speak about to fintechs. If you don't do that well, you will be in trouble. And to do that, you bring in harmonization from an form factor perspective. We spoke about USSD, we spoke about QR codes, we spoke about mobile apps. That's all technology, and that's moving in at a rapid pace. What is really important is how the regulators, and I'm sure regulators worldwide, that's what our job is as TerraPay. We are licensed in 32 countries, we're operational in 145 countries. How are we able to bring this harmonization of money movement from a compliance perspective is the secret sauce. And if you do that well, with data points, and you could take maybe PSD2 as an example, that's where I think the harmonization really come in. So for us, to be global, you need to be local. And that's probably where I would really want us to, and this is what the panel was talking about. This is all about bringing new innovation on the forefront of it, but still being able to understand the local regulations, the local problem statements come on the forefront, and build solutions. That's what fintechs do really well.
Thank you so much, Annie. Yes, and we as LeRemitt would love to have these technologies for my MSME customers so that I can also help them move their money local to local and not really global. Thank you so much. Thank you, the panel members and the audience and the organizers. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you want to travel with UPI, please come on our booth on S16. You will be able to do a UPI transaction to win a ticket for Eiffel Tower and maybe a mascot of the Olympic Games. Thank you.
All right, so let's go to Eiffel Tower, everybody. Yes. All right, it's a picture time. We need a picture.